They dragged her through the mud and iron chains while 300 men shouted numbers like she was livestock. 26 years old, educated, raised to ride and shoot and read contract law, none of it mattered now. Her father's gambling debts had turned her into property, and the highest bidder would decide if she lived or died. Then a man everyone feared stepped forward, and the entire town went silent. What he did next would change the Montana Territory forever. Stay until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Evelyn's journey travels across the world. The rain came down in sheets that turned the main street of Settlers Bend into a river of filth. Evelyn Mercer stood on the auction platform with her wrists shackled, her dress soaked through, her dark hair plastered against a face that refused to show fear, even as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird.
"Lot 17, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice cutting through the downpour. "Young woman, literate, can cipher numbers, healthy stock. Contracted service to pay debts totaling $800 plus interest. Bidding starts at $200. The crowd pressed closer. Miners with mud on their boots, ranchers with tobacco stains on their teeth, men who looked at her the way wolves looked at wounded deer. $225, someone shouted from the back.
Evelyn's stomach twisted. She'd watched this happen to others before her father died, watched desperate people sold off piece by piece to cover gambling losses, bad investments, failed crops. She'd never imagined she'd be standing here herself, chained to a post like an animal while rain hammered down and men decided her worth in dollars and cents. $250, another voice called out. The auctioneer grinned, his teeth yellow in the gray light. That's more like it, gentlemen. This ain't your average field worker. Look at those hands. No calluses. She's been kept soft. Educated too, which means she can manage a household, keep books, teach children if you got 'em. Evelyn wanted to spit at him. Instead, she lifted her chin and stared straight ahead, focusing on the mountains in the distance. The Rockies rose like jagged teeth against the storm clouds, and she wondered if she'd ever see them up close again, or if whoever bought her today would work her to death in some dark cabin miles from anywhere. 300, a new voice boomed, and the crowd rippled with nervous energy. Evelyn recognized him immediately, Marcus Webb, who ran the Redstone mining operation 30 miles north. She'd heard stories about Webb's camp. Women didn't last long there. The ones who survived came back to town hollow-eyed and broken, if they came back at all. Webb pushed through the crowd, his bulk parting miners like water. He wore a coat that had probably cost more than most families earned in a year, but his eyes were cold and flat. "That's a serious bid, Mr. Webb," the auctioneer said, suddenly more nervous. "Anyone care to challenge?" Silence. Even the miners who'd been shouting earlier backed off. Nobody wanted to cross Marcus Webb. Evelyn felt ice spread through her chest. This was it. This was how her story ended, dragged north to some hellhole mining camp where she'd disappear like all the others. $350, Webb said, even though nobody else was bidding. "Let's make this quick." The auctioneer nodded eagerly. $350 going once. $500. The voice came from the edge of the crowd, quiet, but carrying weight that made everyone turn. Evelyn couldn't see who'd spoken at first. The rain was too heavy and the crowd too thick, but she watched the shift in posture, the way miners suddenly found reasons to step back and create space. Then he emerged. Caleb Boone was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered beneath a dark coat that was nearly black with rain. He wore his hat low, but she could see the hard lines of his face, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and forgotten how to smile about any of it. People whispered his name like a curse or a prayer, depending on which side of his temper they'd encountered. Black Ridge Ranch, the man who'd built an empire out of frozen dirt and cattle drives that broke lesser men. The rancher who'd survived Shiloh, survived the long march home, survived winters that killed entire herds and attacks from outlaws who thought his isolated ranch would be easy pickings. They'd all been wrong. "Mr. Boone," the auctioneer stammered, "we weren't expecting a... $500, Caleb repeated, his voice flat. "You deaf?" Marcus Webb's face darkened. $600. "7, Caleb said immediately, not even looking at Webb. The crowd had gone completely silent now, except for the drumming rain. This wasn't about Evelyn anymore. Everyone could see that. This was about power, about two men who controlled half the territory between them deciding who'd blink first. $800, Webb snarled. Caleb finally turned to look at him, and Evelyn saw something dangerous flash across his face. "You really want to do this?" "She's worth it," Webb said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "To you, maybe." Caleb stepped closer to the platform, his boots splashing through puddles. "But not for the reasons you're thinking." "You don't know what I'm thinking." "Sure I do. Every man here knows what you're thinking. That's why I'm bidding $1,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd. $1,000 was more than most settlers saw in 5 years. It was insane money for a contract servant, even one who could read and write. Webb's jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but he knew when he was beaten. With one last venomous look at Caleb, he shoved his way back through the crowd and disappeared into the rain. The auctioneer looked like he might pass out from excitement. 1,000, going once, twice, sold to Mr. Caleb Boone of Black Ridge Ranch. The crowd erupted into conversation, but Evelyn barely heard it. She was staring at Caleb, trying to understand what had just happened and what it meant for her future. He'd bought her for a fortune. Men didn't spend that kind of money unless they expected something specific in return. Caleb climbed the platform steps and stopped in front of her. Up close, he looked even harder, like something carved from stone and left out in the weather too long. There was a scar across his left cheekbone and another disappearing under his collar. His hands, when he reached for her shackles, were calloused and scarred. "These come off now," he told the auctioneer. "Well, the paperwork requires now." The auctioneer fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the iron cuffs. They fell away with a clatter, and Evelyn rubbed her raw wrists, still not speaking. She didn't trust her voice yet. Caleb pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm and smelled like leather and wood smoke. "Can you ride?" Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. "Yes." "Good. We've got 6 hours to Black Ridge, and the storm's getting worse." He turned to leave, clearly expecting her to follow. Evelyn stayed frozen on the platform, her mind racing. Around her, the crowd was dispersing, miners heading back to saloons and ranchers to their wagons. Nobody looked at her anymore. The auction was over. She belonged to someone now. "You coming or not?" Caleb called from the street. "I don't even know what you bought me for," Evelyn said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He turned back, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Bought your contract, paid your father's debts. That means something different where you're from?" "It means you own me." "Paperwork says different. Says you work off the debt, then you're free." "Work doing what exactly?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You got secretarial skills? Can you manage accounts, organize paperwork, handle correspondence?" Evelyn blinked. Of all the things she'd feared, being asked about bookkeeping hadn't made the list. "My father taught me, before everything fell apart." "Good. My records are a disaster, and I can't read half of what my foreman writes." "You can handle that. We'll get along fine." "That's it? You paid $1,000 for a bookkeeper?" "I paid $1,000, Caleb said quietly, "to keep Marcus Webb from getting his hands on you. The bookkeeping's just bonus." He said it so matter-of-factly that it took Evelyn a moment to process. When she did, she didn't know whether to feel grateful or angry or terrified. Maybe all three. "I don't need saving," she said. "Didn't say you did. But you needed not being dragged to Redstone Camp, and now you got that. You want to stand here arguing philosophy in the rain, or you want to get somewhere dry?" Evelyn realized she was shivering despite the coat. Her dress was soaked through and her boots were caked in mud. She had no money, no family, nowhere to go except wherever this stranger decided to take her. "Fine," she said, climbing down from the platform. "But I want it clear right now. I'll work off the debt. I'll keep your damn books, but I'm not your property, contract or no contract." Caleb studied her for a long moment, rain streaming down his face. Then he nodded once. "Fair enough. Come on." He led her through the muddy streets to where 2 horses were tied outside a general store. One was a massive black gelding that suited him perfectly. The other was a smaller bay mare with intelligent eyes. "You can ride her," Caleb said, untying the mare. "Name's Copper. She's got sense, won't throw you even if the trail gets rough." Evelyn took the reins, surprised by the gesture. Most men in his position would have made her ride behind them or thrown her in a wagon. She hauled herself into the saddle, awkward with the wet dress but manageable, and settled into the leather. Caleb swung onto his gelding like he'd been born on horseback. We stop once to rest the horses. Otherwise, we ride straight through. Storm this bad. I don't want to be caught in the open come nightfall. What's out there? Evelyn asked. Besides weather? Outlaws, mountain lions, bears if you're unlucky, crow's men if you're really unlucky. Who's Crow? Someone you don't want to meet. Caleb nudged his horse forward. Stay close and keep up. You fall behind. I'm not circling back in this mess. They rode out of Settlers Bend heading northwest, leaving the ramshackle frontier town behind. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it got worse, turning the trail into a morass of mud and standing water. Evelyn focused on staying in the saddle and following the broad shape of Caleb ahead of her. The Montana Territory spread out around them in shades of gray, rolling foothills rising toward distant mountains, stands of pine and aspen bent under the weight of rain, rocky outcrops that looked like ancient bones pushing through the earth. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way that matched the man leading her into the wilderness. After an hour of riding, Evelyn's hands were numb on the reins and her teeth were chattering despite Caleb's coat. She refused to complain. She'd survived worse than cold and rain. She'd survived watching her father gamble away everything they owned, survived the long weeks after his death, when creditors circled like vultures, survived standing on that auction block while men bid for her like she was cattle. She could survive a horseback ride through a storm. Another hour passed. The trail climbed higher into the foothills, winding between rocks and trees. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Evelyn caught glimpses of lightning forking across the darkening sky. Her mare picked her way carefully over slick stones, ears flicking nervously at each thunderclap. Caleb finally pulled up in a small clearing where an overhang of rock provided minimal shelter. We'll rest here, he said, dismounting. 10 minutes. Evelyn slid from her saddle and immediately stumbled, her legs cramping from the cold and wet. Caleb caught her elbow before she fell. Easy, he said. Walk it off. She pulled her arm free and forced herself to move, pacing back and forth until feeling returned to her legs. Caleb tended to the horses, checking their hooves and loosening the girths to let them breathe. He pulled something from his saddlebag and tossed it to Evelyn, jerky wrapped in oilcloth. Eat, he ordered. You're shaking. Evelyn wanted to refuse on principle, but her stomach was empty and the jerky smelled good. She tore off a piece and chewed, the salt and smoke flavor almost overwhelming after hours of nothing but rain. How much farther? She asked. 4 hours if the trail holds, 6 if we hit washouts. And then what? Caleb leaned against the rock face, water dripping from his hat. Then you get dry clothes, hot food, and a bed. Tomorrow we'll talk about what needs doing. The bookkeeping. Among other things. Ranch has been bleeding money for 2 years and I can't figure out why. Records are a mess, contracts are scattered everywhere, half my suppliers are trying to cheat me, and the other half have probably succeeded. I need someone who can make sense of it. Why me? There must be clerks in town who could— Clerks talk, Caleb interrupted. Anything they learn gets shared over drinks at the saloon. Right now I got problems I can't afford people knowing about. Evelyn studied him, trying to read past the hard exterior. What kind of problems? The kind that end with me losing everything if I don't fix them fast. He straightened, checking the sky. We should move. Storm's going to get worse before it gets better. They remounted and continued northwest. The rain turned to sleet as they climbed higher, stinging Evelyn's face and hands. The temperature dropped until she could see her breath misting in the gray air. Copper plodded steadily forward, following Caleb's gelding without needing guidance. Darkness fell early under the heavy clouds. Caleb produced a lantern from his pack and lit it, the golden glow barely penetrating the sleet and gloom. The trail became treacherous, winding along ridgelines where one wrong step would send them tumbling into darkness. Evelyn lost track of time. Everything blurred together, cold, wet, exhaustion, fear. Her hands were locked on the saddle horn because she couldn't feel the reins anymore. She fixed her eyes on the lantern bobbing ahead and let Copper do the thinking. When Caleb finally stopped, Evelyn almost ran into him. She blinked through the sleet and saw lights, golden rectangles of windows glowing in the darkness, the dark shapes of buildings, smoke rising from chimneys. Black Ridge, Caleb said. Home. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, like he wasn't quite sure it applied to him. They rode through a gate flanked by tall posts, then between fenced paddocks where horses stood with their backs to the weather. The main house loomed ahead, 2 stories of rough-hewn logs with a wide porch and stone chimney. Light spilled from multiple windows, and Evelyn could see figures moving inside. Caleb dismounted in front of the barn and hammered on the door. It opened immediately, revealing a grizzled man with white hair and a limp. "Boss," the man said, taking in Evelyn with one shrewd glance. "Wasn't expecting you back tonight." "Storm pushed us hard. Take care of the horses, Daniel. Make sure Copper gets rubbed down good. She earned it." "Will do." Daniel took the reins, his eyes still on Evelyn. "This the girl from Settler's Bend?" "Her name's Evelyn Mercer," Caleb said flatly. "And she's not a girl, she's a woman who's had a rough day. Show some manners." Daniel had the grace to look embarrassed. "My apologies, miss. Welcome to Black Ridge." Evelyn managed a nod, too cold and tired to manage words. Caleb led her toward the house. They climbed the porch steps, and he pushed open the front door, ushering her into warmth and light that made her eyes sting after hours in the dark. The interior was larger than she'd expected, a wide central room with a massive fireplace, rough furniture that looked handmade but sturdy, shelves lined with books and ledgers, rifles mounted on the walls. A staircase climbed to the second floor. Doorways led to what she assumed were kitchen and other rooms. A woman emerged from one of those doorways, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back and sharp eyes that took in everything at once. "Lord above, Caleb, you rode through that?" She turned to Evelyn. "Child, you look half frozen. Come here by the fire." "This is Martha," Caleb said. "She runs the house and makes sure nobody starves. Martha, this is Evelyn Mercer. She'll be staying in the East Room." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't question it. "East Room's got clean linens. I'll bring up hot water for washing and find some dry clothes." She steered Evelyn toward the fireplace. "Sit. I'll get tea." Evelyn sank onto a bench near the flames, her body suddenly too heavy to hold upright. The warmth hurt at first, pins and needles spreading through her frozen hands and feet. She closed her eyes and just focused on breathing. "Here." Martha pressed a cup into her hands. "Drink slow." The tea was strong and sweet and scalded all the way down. Evelyn didn't care. It was the best thing she'd tasted in days. When she opened her eyes again, Caleb was gone. Martha sat across from her, waiting patiently. "You got questions?" Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. "I got plenty, but they can wait until you're warm and fed and rested." Martha stood. "Come on, let's get you upstairs before you fall asleep right here." Evelyn followed her up the staircase to a hallway with several doors. Martha opened one to reveal a small but comfortable room, a bed with thick quilts, a dresser, a washstand, a window that probably looked out over the ranch when it wasn't dark and sleeting. "I'll bring water and clothes," Martha said. "You get out of that wet dress before you catch your death." Alone, Evelyn peeled off Caleb's coat and hung it carefully on a peg. Then she struggled out of her sodden dress, her fingers clumsy with cold. She stood in her undergarments, shivering, when Martha returned with a steaming basin and an armful of fabric. "These were mine when I was younger," Martha said, setting down a simple work dress and warm stockings. "Should fit well enough. There's more in the dresser if you need them." "Thank you," Evelyn managed. Martha nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Evelyn washed quickly, the hot water heaven on her frozen skin. She scrubbed away mud and sweat and the memory of standing on that auction block. Then she pulled on the borrowed clothes, rough cotton, but clean and dry and warm. Her reflection in the small mirror over the washstand showed a stranger. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, hair a tangled mess. She looked like she'd been dragged through hell backward. She looked like a woman who'd been sold. Evelyn turned away from the mirror and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was softer than she'd expected, the quilts thick and smelling faintly of cedar. Through the floor, she could hear voices downstairs, Caleb and Martha talking, though she couldn't make out words. She should go down. Should insist on understanding exactly what was expected of her, what her position in this household would be, how the work arrangement was structured. Instead, she lay back on the bed just for a moment, just to rest her eyes. She was asleep before she finished the thought. Much. Evelyn woke to daylight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from below. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The auction, the ride, Black Ridge Ranch. She sat up, disoriented. The room looked different in daylight, less forbidding. Through the window, she could see the storm had passed, leaving the landscape washed clean under a pale blue sky. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks white with snow. Someone had left fresh water in the basin and laid out more clothes, another work dress, a warm shawl, sturdy boots that looked new. Evelyn washed and dressed quickly, braiding her hair back in a practical style. Downstairs, she found Martha in the kitchen, a large room dominated by a massive iron stove and a table that could seat 12 people. "There you are," Martha said. "Sit. Breakfast is ready." "I can help at—" "You can sit," Martha said firmly. "Time enough for work later." Evelyn sat. Martha placed a plate in front of her. Eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, thick slices of bread with butter and jam. More food than Evelyn had seen in weeks. Her stomach growled audibly. "Eat," Martha commanded. "Your skin and bones." Evelyn ate, trying not to wolf the food down like an animal. It was difficult. Everything tasted incredible after days of near starvation. "Caleb's out with the men," Martha said, pouring coffee. "He'll be back around noon to show you the records room. Until then, you can rest or I can show you around the place. Your choice." "Show me around," Evelyn said immediately. "I want to understand what I'm dealing with." Martha smiled slightly. "Thought you might say that. Finish eating, then we'll take a walk." 20 minutes later, they stepped out onto the porch into cold, clear morning air. In daylight, Black Ridge Ranch sprawled before them like a small kingdom. The main house sat at the center of a compound of buildings: barns, stables, bunkhouses, storage sheds, a smokehouse, a forge. Beyond the immediate buildings stretched pastures and corrals where cattle grazed and horses ran. Fences marked off fields and paddocks. Mountains ringed the valley on 3 sides, and through the middle ran a creek that probably fed from snowmelt year-round. "Caleb's been building this for 12 years, Martha said as they walked toward the barns. "Started with nothing but a piece of paper saying he owned this valley and a mule so old it died the first winter. Now he's got 2,000 head of cattle, 50 horses, 30 men working year-round." "How do you know all this?" Evelyn asked. "I was the first person he hired. My husband was his sergeant during the war. When Thomas died at Petersburg, Caleb wrote and said, if I ever needed work, he'd have it. Took him 5 years to actually have a ranch worth running, but he kept his word." They passed groups of ranch hands heading to various tasks. Most tipped their hats to Martha and stared openly at Evelyn. She stared back until they looked away. "They'll talk," Martha said. "About you, about why Caleb brought you here. Let them. Talk don't change facts." "And what are the facts?" "Facts are Caleb Boone don't do nothing without a reason, and if he paid $1,000 for your contract, he's got a plan. He's not the warmest man you'll ever meet, but he's fair and he's honest. You'll be safe here. Safe." The word felt strange. Evelyn had been safe once, back when her father was alive and sober, and the ranch her family owned was thriving. That safety had been an illusion, shattered the moment her father's gambling debts came due. She didn't trust promises of safety anymore. They completed a circuit of the immediate ranch buildings, Martha pointing out what everything was used for and introducing Evelyn to various workers. A blacksmith named Tom, who'd lost an arm in the war. A cook named Mary, who ran the bunkhouse kitchen. A young Mexican vaquero named Carlos, who trained horses and spoke 3 languages. Everyone was polite but wary. Evelyn didn't blame them. She was a stranger, bought in an auction, brought here for reasons nobody understood yet. When they returned to the main house, Caleb was waiting on the porch. He'd cleaned up since last night, shaved, changed into fresh clothes, but still looked like something carved from granite. "Martha," he said with a nod. Then to Evelyn, "You ready to work?" "That's what I'm here for," Evelyn said. He led her inside and down a hallway to a room she hadn't noticed last night. When he opened the door, Evelyn's jaw dropped. The room was chaos. Papers everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled on a massive desk, scattered across the floor. Ledgers with pages falling out. Contracts rolled and tied with string, or not tied and just shoved in corners. Maps pinned crookedly to walls, filing cabinets with drawers hanging open, contents spilling out. "This," Caleb said flatly, "is why I bought you." Evelyn stepped into the disaster, picking up a random paper. It was a supply contract dated 2 years ago, with terms that made her eyes widen. "You're paying twice the market rate for feed grain." "I know." "Did you negotiate this?" My foreman did. Man named Jensen. He was handling most of the business side. Was? Died 6 months ago. Heart gave out. Since then, everything's been falling apart and I can't figure out why. Evelyn set down the contract and picked up another paper, a promissory note with terms that seemed deliberately confusing. Someone's been cheating you, probably for years. That's what I figured. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, watching her. Think you can untangle it? Evelyn looked around the room, mentally calculating the work involved. Weeks, maybe months, of sorting and organizing and cross-referencing. It would be exhausting, tedious, mind-numbing. It would also be the first real work she'd done in months, the first thing she'd controlled since her father died. Yes, she said, but I'll need supplies. Proper ledgers, filing boxes, labels, ink, pens. Make a list. I'll have someone ride to town tomorrow. And I'll need to talk to people. Your foreman's replacement, your suppliers, anyone who's been handling finances. Done. Caleb straightened. Anything else? Evelyn met his gaze directly. I need to know you'll actually listen to what I find. If I discover someone's been stealing from you, or lying, or sabotaging, then I'll handle it, Caleb interrupted. That's not your problem. It is if I'm the one who has to tell you your most trusted people have been bleeding you dry. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but close. Fair point. All right. You find evidence of theft or sabotage, you bring it to me privately. We'll figure out what to do together. Together. The word hung between them, loaded with implications Evelyn wasn't ready to examine. I'll start today, she said, turning back to the chaos. But don't expect miracles. This is going to take time. Time's the one thing I'm running out of, Caleb said quietly. Banks threatening to call my loans. Silas Crow's been buying up water rights upstream, trying to cut off access to the creek. If I can't prove the ranch is profitable by end of summer, I lose everything. Evelyn absorbed that. 6 months, that's all she had to sort through years of financial sabotage and save a ranch empire from collapsing. Then I'd better get started, she said. Caleb nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Alone in the paper-strewn room, Evelyn rolled up her sleeves and began. 3 weeks into sorting through the financial wreckage, Evelyn found the first real evidence that someone had been systematically destroying Black Ridge from the inside. It was late afternoon, the kind of slanting golden light that made the dust motes visible as they drifted through the records room. She'd been cross-referencing supply invoices against delivery records when the pattern emerged. Subtle at first, then unmistakable once she knew what to look for. Cattle counts were off. Not wildly, just 5 or 10 head here and there across multiple shipments. Feed orders didn't match consumption rates. Equipment purchases appeared on invoices but never showed up in inventory logs. Small discrepancies that individually meant nothing but together painted a picture of organized theft. Evelyn sat back, her neck aching from hours bent over ledgers. Her fingers were stained with ink and her eyes burned from reading faded handwriting by lamplight. She'd filled 4 notebooks with discrepancies, organized by date and type, cross-referenced against the people who'd signed off on each transaction. One name appeared more than any other. Ray Connolly, current foreman, promoted after Jensen's death 6 months ago. Caleb's right hand, the man who ran day-to-day operations while Caleb dealt with the bigger picture of keeping the ranch alive. If Evelyn was reading this correctly, Connolly had been embezzling for at least 2 years, possibly longer. Small amounts that wouldn't trigger suspicion, spread across enough transactions that no single theft stood out. Brilliant in its way. By the time anyone noticed, the damage would be catastrophic. She needed to tell Caleb, but she also needed more proof than pattern recognition and circumstantial evidence. If she accused Connolly without ironclad documentation, it would be her word against a man who'd worked at Black Ridge for 5 years. The door opened and Martha stuck her head in. Supper's ready. You planning to eat or turn into a desk? Evelyn blinked, realizing she'd skipped lunch entirely. I'll be down in a minute. That's what you said 3 hours ago. Martha stepped inside, surveying the transformed room. In 3 weeks, Evelyn had imposed order on chaos. Papers filed, ledgers organized, contracts cataloged. The floor was visible again. You're working yourself to death. I'm working to save this ranch, Evelyn said more sharply than intended. There's a difference. Martha's expression softened. Maybe, but a dead bookkeeper won't do Caleb much good. Come eat. The numbers will still be here after supper. Evelyn wanted to argue, but her stomach growled traitorously. She stood, joints protesting, and followed Martha to the dining room. Caleb was already seated at the long table, along with Connolly and two other senior ranch hands, Daniel, the barn manager she'd met her first night, and a weathered cowboy named Tucker who handled the cattle drives. This had become routine over the past weeks, dinner together most evenings, discussing the day's work and planning tomorrow's. Evelyn had learned to read the dynamics. Daniel was loyal to Caleb without question, old enough and experienced enough to speak his mind when he disagreed. Tucker was quieter but sharp, his opinions carrying weight when he chose to voice them. And Connolly was smooth, charismatic, always ready with explanations for why things cost more than expected or took longer than planned. She'd thought he was just incompetent at first. Now she knew better. "Miss Mercer," Connolly said with a smile as she sat down. He was handsome in a rough way, dark hair going gray at the temples, confident smile that probably worked well on most women. "Still buried in paperwork?" "Someone has to organize the mess," Evelyn said neutrally. "How's it coming?" Caleb asked, serving himself stew from the pot Martha had placed in the center of the table. Evelyn hesitated. She had planned to talk to him privately, but something about Connolly's easy smile made her reckless. "I found some interesting patterns in the cattle records." The table went quiet. Connolly's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. "What kind of patterns?" Caleb asked. "Discrepancies between what we supposedly bought and what actually arrived. Small numbers, spread out over time, but they add up." "Cattle die," Connolly said easily. "Get stolen, wander off, fall sick. That's ranching." "I'm aware, but these discrepancies started before the cattle even reached Black Ridge. The numbers are wrong at purchase, not after delivery." Tucker leaned forward, interested now. "You saying we've been shorted?" "I'm saying the paperwork doesn't match reality, which means either our suppliers are cheating us or someone here is fudging the books." The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Connolly's smile finally slipped. "That's a serious charge," he said, voice cooling. "You got proof or just suspicions from someone who's been here 3 weeks?" "I have documentation," Evelyn said calmly. "Invoices, delivery receipts, inventory counts, all showing a pattern of missing cattle that coincidentally started around the same time. All." "Careful," Connolly interrupted, setting down his fork with deliberate precision. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work yet. Ranching isn't neat columns and ledgers. It's messy and unpredictable, and sometimes the numbers don't line up perfect. These aren't rounding errors, Mr. Connolly. These are systematic discrepancies that—" "Enough!" Caleb's voice cut through the rising tension. He looked at Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "You have documentation?" "Yes." "Show me after dinner. In private." His gaze shifted to Connolly. "That go for you too?" Connolly straightened, clearly trying to decide whether to be offended or cooperative. "Of course. I've got nothing to hide." But Evelyn saw his hand tremble slightly as he reached for his water glass, and she knew she was right. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. Tucker and Daniel exchanged glances but said nothing. Martha served dessert, apple pie, but nobody had much appetite for it. When Caleb finally stood, everyone scattered quickly, relieved to escape the tension. "My office," Caleb told Evelyn. "Bring your evidence." She retrieved her notebooks and followed him to a small room off the main hall that served as his private workspace. The office was spare. A desk, 2 chairs, a gun cabinet, maps of the territory covering one wall. Caleb sat behind the desk and gestured for her to take the other chair. "Walk me through it," he said. Evelyn opened her first notebook and laid out the patterns she'd discovered. Purchase orders for cattle that showed specific head counts, but delivery receipts signed by Connolly reflecting lower numbers. Feed orders for amounts that didn't match what the ranch actually consumed. Equipment supposedly purchased but never logged into inventory. "Could be honest mistakes," Caleb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Could be. If it happened once or twice, but it's dozens of transactions over 2 years, always in Connolly's name, always benefiting whoever's on the other end. You think Ray's stealing from me?" "I think someone is, and the evidence points to your foreman." Caleb sat back, rubbing his face with both hands. He looked suddenly older, worn down by the weight of keeping everything together. "Ray worked for Jensen for 3 years before I promoted him. Never gave me reason to doubt him.
Maybe he saw opportunity when Jensen died, or maybe he's been doing this all along and Jensen never noticed. Either way, he's costing you thousands. If you're right. I am right. Evelyn leaned forward, urgent now. Caleb, this isn't just about money. If Connolly's been working with your suppliers to skim profits, he probably knows you're vulnerable right now. He knows the bank's threatening foreclosure. He could be feeding information to your competitors. Like Silas Crow.
Like Silas Crow, Evelyn agreed, who's been buying water rights and trying to strangle your access to the creek, who probably knows exactly how bad your financial situation is because someone's been telling him. Caleb's jaw tightened. You have proof of that? Not yet, but I'd bet money if we dig deeper, we'll find a connection. He stood and paced to the window, staring out at the darkening ranch. If I accuse Ray without absolute proof, I split the crew. Half will believe me, half will think I'm paranoid or desperate. Either way, I lose control. And if you do nothing, he keeps stealing until the bank forecloses and Crow swoops in to buy everything at auction. Caleb turned back to face her. What do you suggest? Evelyn had been thinking about this all afternoon. I need to see Crow's operation, talk to his suppliers, maybe get a look at his books if possible. If he and Connolly are working together, there'll be a paper trail somewhere. Crow's place is 30 miles north, past the mining camps. Dangerous territory even for men. You can't just ride in and ask to see his financial records. No, Evelyn agreed, but I could ride in pretending to surrender. The silence that followed was absolute. Explain that, Caleb said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. Crow wants Black Ridge. Everyone knows that. If I showed up claiming you're about to lose everything to the bank and I'm looking to make a deal on your behalf, he'd probably listen. Men like him love feeling like they've won. And then what? He shows you his secret ledgers proving he's been sabotaging me? No. But he might let slip something useful. A name, a detail, some connection to Connolly. And while I'm distracting him, someone else could search his office. This is insane, Caleb said flatly. You're talking about walking into the camp of a man who'd slit your throat and dump you in a ravine without a second thought. I'm talking about getting the evidence we need before Connolly or Crow or whoever else is working against you destroys this ranch completely. No. Caleb shook his head. Absolutely not. I'll handle Connolly myself. We'll audit everything, confront him with what we have, and deal with whatever comes. And if he runs, if he warns Crow, you'll lose your only chance to prove the conspiracy. Better than getting you killed. The words came out harsh, almost angry, and Evelyn realized with a jolt that he was genuinely worried about her. Not as property, not as an investment, but as a person he didn't want to see hurt. I can take care of myself, she said softly. That's what everyone says right before things go wrong. I survived being auctioned like livestock. I survived a storm ride that nearly killed both of us. I think I can handle one arrogant cattle baron. Caleb studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he sighed. If we do this, and I'm not saying we will, you don't go alone. I'll come with you. We'll both play the part. That defeats the purpose. Crow knows you'd never surrender. Then we'll make him believe it. Tell him the bank's foreclosing, I'm desperate, and you're the messenger because I'm too proud to show my face. He'll buy that. And while we're there? Tucker, Caleb said suddenly. He worked for Crow 5 years ago before joining Black Ridge. Knows the layout of the ranch house. If we create enough distraction, Tucker could get inside and search Crow's office. It was reckless and dangerous and could blow up in their faces a dozen different ways. But Evelyn saw the cold calculation in Caleb's expression and knew he was serious. When? She asked. 3 days. That gives us time to plan properly and for Tucker to prepare. But Evelyn, if this goes wrong, if you feel threatened for even a second, you get out. Understood? Understood. But they both knew once they rode into Crow territory, getting out might not be an option. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation disguised as routine. Caleb announced he was riding to a neighboring ranch to discuss cattle prices, taking Evelyn and Tucker along because she needed to understand the business side of ranching. Connolly barely blinked at the explanation. During the days, Evelyn continued organizing records and avoiding Connolly as much as possible. During the evenings, she, Caleb, and Tucker met in the office to rehearse their plan. Crow's office is in the main house, second floor, northwest corner, Tucker said, sketching a rough map. He keeps records in a safe behind a painting. I don't know the combination, but the hinges are on the outside. Could probably pry it open if I had 10 minutes. You'll have less than that, Caleb said. We'll try to buy 15 minutes maximum, but count on 10. What exactly are we looking for? Evelyn asked. Anything connecting him to Black Ridge. Contracts with our suppliers, payment records, correspondence with Connolly. Something we can use in court. If we find it, then what? Then we take it to the territorial marshal and let the law handle it. But we need proof first. Right now, we've got suspicions and circumstantial evidence. That won't stand up.
On the morning of the third day, they rode out before dawn. Caleb had told Connolly they'd be gone overnight, and the foreman had barely looked up from his breakfast. Either he suspected nothing, or he was playing his own game and watching them leave with satisfaction. The ride to Crow territory took 4 hours across rough country. They passed mining camps where hollow-eyed men worked claims that would probably never pay out, crossed creeks swollen with spring runoff, climbed ridgelines where the view stretched for miles in every direction. Tucker rode quiet and tense, clearly unhappy about returning to his former employer's land. Caleb was his usual stoic self, though Evelyn noticed he checked his rifle twice and kept scanning the horizon like he expected trouble. Evelyn tried to project calm she didn't feel. Her stomach was tied in knots and her hands were sweaty on the reins despite the cool morning air. She kept rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd act, trying to channel the desperate messenger rather than the furious woman who'd discovered she'd been living under the same roof as a thief. They spotted Crow's ranch just after noon. It sprawled across a valley similar to Black Ridge, but somehow less welcoming. Buildings set in rigid lines, fences perfectly straight, everything organized with military precision. Men worked in coordinated groups, and Evelyn saw guards posted at intervals around the property. He runs it like a prison camp, Tucker muttered. Nobody moves without permission. As they approached the main gate, 2 armed men stepped out to block their path. State your business, the larger one said, rifle held casually but ready. Message for Mr. Crow, Caleb said. From Black Ridge Ranch. The guards exchanged glances. Boss ain't expecting Caleb Boone. He'll want to hear what I have to say. Trust me. After a tense moment, one guard disappeared toward the main house while the other watched them with obvious suspicion. Evelyn forced herself to breathe normally and not look around too obviously. The guard returned 5 minutes later. Boss says bring him to the house, but leave your weapons. Caleb hesitated, then slowly unbuckled his gun belt and handed it over. Tucker did the same. Evelyn had brought no weapons, which suddenly seemed like either the smartest or stupidest decision she'd made all week. They dismounted and were escorted across the compound toward the main house. It was larger than Caleb's, 2 full stories with columns across the front porch, like it was trying to be a southern plantation dropped in the middle of Montana. Everything about it screamed money and power and the arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world. Silas Crow waited on the porch, watching them approach with undisguised interest. He was perhaps 50, built like a bull, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. He wore expensive clothes and a smile that never reached those eyes. Caleb Boone, Crow said, his voice carrying across the yard. Never thought I'd see the day you came begging at my door. I'm not begging, Caleb said evenly. I'm being practical. Is that what we're calling it? Crow's gaze shifted to Evelyn. And who's this? Evelyn Mercer. She manages my accounts. The auction girl. Crow's smile widened. Heard you paid a fortune for her. Hope she's worth it. Evelyn felt her jaw clench but kept her expression neutral. Mr. Crow? Come inside, Crow said, turning toward the door. Let's discuss this practical arrangement. They followed him into a parlor decorated with more wealth than taste. Heavy furniture, gaudy paintings, a chandelier that belonged in a San Francisco mansion rather than a Montana ranch house. Crow gestured for them to sit while he poured drinks from a crystal decanter. So, he said, handing glasses around, what brings the famous Caleb Boone to my home? Caleb took a breath and Evelyn saw how much this cost him. The bank's calling my loans. End of summer, they'll foreclose unless I can pay in full. Unfortunate. Crow didn't sound sympathetic. But what's that got to do with me? You've been trying to buy Black Ridge for years. I'm offering to sell before the bank takes it. The silence stretched. Crow studied them over his glass, clearly trying to decide if this was legitimate or some kind of trick. Why would you sell to me instead of letting it go to auction? Might get a better price. Because auction means everything goes. My home, my equipment, my reputation. If I sell to you directly, I can negotiate terms, keep some dignity. Dignity? Crow laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. You always were too proud for your own good, Boone. That's why you're failing now. Caleb's hands tightened on his glass, but he kept his voice level. Are you interested or not? Oh, I'm interested, but I need details. How much you owe, what assets you're including, timeline for transfer. He glanced at Evelyn. That's where your accountant comes in, I suppose. I have all the documentation, Evelyn said, pulling papers from her saddlebag. She'd prepared carefully for this. Real financial statements mixed with just enough falsified information to make Blackridge look like a dying enterprise. Current debt obligations, asset valuations, projected losses through year-end. She spread the papers on a low table, and Crow leaned forward to examine them. While he was distracted, Tucker caught her eye and drifted casually toward the doorway. These numbers are worse than I thought, Crow said, but he sounded pleased. You're drowning, Boone. Which is why I'm here, Caleb said through gritted teeth. Let me get my own records. I'll want to compare against what I know about your operation. Crow stood and headed for the stairs. Wilson, bring coffee for our guests. The moment he disappeared upstairs, Tucker slipped out of the room. Evelyn's heart hammered. They had minutes, maybe less. You're doing good, Caleb murmured. Keep him talking when he comes back. A servant arrived with coffee, and Evelyn busied herself pouring and serving, burning precious seconds. Her hands wanted to shake, but she forced them steady. Crow returned carrying a ledger. Now let's see what we're really talking about. For the next 10 minutes, Evelyn walked him through the falsified documentation, answering questions and spinning explanations that painted Blackridge as a sinking ship. She was acutely aware of every passing second, wondering if Tucker had found anything, if he'd been caught, if guards were closing in right now. There's one thing I don't understand, Crow said suddenly, his eyes sharp on Evelyn. If the ranch is failing this badly, why did Boone spend $1,000 buying you 6 weeks ago? The question hung like a trap. Evelyn felt Caleb tense beside her. Last desperate attempt to fix the books, she said smoothly. He thought if someone could organize the mess, find savings, maybe delay the inevitable. But some things can't be fixed with bookkeeping. Smart woman, Crow said, but there was something calculating in his expression. Smart enough to know when you're working for a losing cause. Smart enough, maybe, to consider better opportunities. What are you suggesting? Evelyn asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. I could use someone with your skills. Blackridge is done regardless of whether Boone sells to me or the bank takes it. But you could have a future here. Better pay, better prospects, better boss. Caleb went very still. Evelyn felt the weight of his attention, waiting to see how she'd respond. That's a generous offer, she said carefully. But I'm contracted to Mr. Boone until the debt's paid. Contracts can be transferred, bought out. I'd be willing to pay significantly more than what Boone paid for you. Crow leaned forward. Think about it. When Blackridge falls, you'll be back on that auction block. Wouldn't you rather choose your next employer? Every word dripped with condescension and threat. Evelyn wanted to throw her coffee in his smug face and tell him exactly what she thought of men who treated human beings like trading cards. Instead, she forced a smile. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Crow. I truly do. But I should discuss it with Mr. Boone first. Of course. Crow sat back, satisfied he'd planted the seed. In the meantime, let's talk numbers for the ranch. They haggled for another 5 minutes over property valuations and payment terms, Crow clearly enjoying watching Caleb squirm. Evelyn kept one eye on the clock, praying Tucker had found something and gotten out safely. Finally, Crow stood. I'll need a few days to arrange financing and review these documents with my lawyers. But barring any surprises, I think we can make a deal. Thank you for your time, Caleb said, standing as well. They were escorted back outside where Tucker was waiting by the horses, looking tense but unharmed. The guards returned their weapons and watched as they mounted up. I'll send word when the contracts are ready, Crow called from the porch. Miss Mercer, you think about my offer. They rode out through the gates and didn't speak until they'd covered a mile of open ground. Finally, Caleb turned to Tucker. Well? Tucker reached inside his coat and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Got into the safe, found these. Evelyn took them, scanning quickly. Purchase orders. Payments to suppliers.
letters of correspondence. And there, her breath caught, a receipt for payments made to Ray Connolly, dated over the past 18 months. Thousands of dollars total, marked as consulting fees. That son of a bitch, Caleb said quietly when she showed him. Ray's been selling me out this whole time. Not just Ray, Evelyn said, reading further. Look at these other names, your grain supplier, your equipment dealer, even your banker. Crow's been paying them all to inflate prices and feed him information. Tucker whistled low. Half the territory's in on it. Which means going to the territorial marshal might not help, Caleb said grimly. If Crow's got the banker in his pocket, he probably owns law enforcement too. Evelyn felt cold despite the afternoon sun. They'd risked everything to get this evidence, and now it might not matter because Crow's corruption ran too deep. So what do we do? She asked. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring at the mountains. When he spoke, his voice was hard as iron. We make them fight each other. Crow thinks he's won, thinks I'm selling. We let him believe that. Meanwhile, we take these documents to every rancher, every businessman, everyone who's ever been screwed by Silas Crow. Show them proof he's been rigging prices and bribing officials. Turn his own conspiracy against him. That'll start a war, Tucker said. Good. I'm tired of playing defense. They rode hard for Black Ridge, arriving just before dark. As they approached the main gate, Daniel came running out. Boss, thank heavens you're back. We got problems. What kind of problems? Cattle are missing from the north pasture, at least 50 head, and Ray Connolly's gone. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Gone where? Don't know. He rode out this morning after you left, told the boys he had business in town. Never came back. Caleb and Evelyn exchanged glances. Connolly had known. Somehow he'd known they were onto him, and he'd run. Or worse, he'd gone to warn Crow that they'd just walked into his ranch and stolen evidence. Get everyone together, Caleb said, dismounting. Main house now. We've got decisions to make. Within 20 minutes, every senior hand was gathered in the main room. Caleb laid out everything. The evidence of theft, Connolly's betrayal, Crow's conspiracy, the stolen documents, the missing foreman, and cattle. So what's the play? Daniel asked when he finished. We take the fight to them, Caleb said. Starting tomorrow, we spread word of what Crow's been doing. We show the evidence to every rancher who's been squeezed by inflated prices. We make sure everyone knows he's been bribing officials and manipulating the market. He'll retaliate, Tucker warned. Let him. We've been bleeding slow for 2 years. At least this way, we die fighting. Martha cleared her throat from the doorway. Or maybe you don't die at all. Maybe you win. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood there calmly, holding a pot of coffee like they were discussing weather instead of potential range war. How do you figure? Caleb asked. Because for the first time since Jensen died, you've got someone on your side who's smart enough to outthink them. Martha nodded at Evelyn. She found the evidence. She walked into Crow's house and played him. She's the reason you even have a chance. So maybe instead of planning your last stand, you should be asking her what comes next. All eyes shifted to Evelyn. She felt heat creep up her neck, unused to being the center of attention and respect rather than suspicion. I'm just a bookkeeper, she said. No, Caleb said quietly. You're not. So what do you think? Evelyn looked at the men gathered around her, hard men who'd survived war and frontier and everything this harsh land could throw at them, now waiting for her opinion like it mattered. I think Martha's right that we need to be smart, she said slowly. Spreading word about Crow will help, but it won't save Black Ridge. We're still in debt, still losing cattle, still vulnerable. We need to turn the conspiracy back on itself. How? Daniel asked. Crow expects Caleb to sell. Let's give him what he wants, but on paper only. We draw up a contract with terms so complicated it'll take weeks to sort through. While his lawyers are drowning in documentation, we quietly approach his suppliers and offer them better deals. Cut him off from the same people he's been using to strangle us. That'll take money we don't have, Tucker pointed out. We don't need to actually pay them. We just need to create doubt. Show them Crow's empire isn't as secure as they thought. Make them nervous enough to stop cooperating with him. Caleb was nodding slowly. And while they're fighting among themselves, we rebuild, Evelyn finished. Find honest suppliers, honest bankers, honest workers. Turn Black Ridge into what it should have been before everyone started stealing from it. The room was silent as everyone absorbed this. Then Daniel started laughing, a rough, surprised sound.
Boss, I think you might have gotten your $1,000 worth after all. Caleb looked at Evelyn, and something passed between them. Recognition, respect, maybe the beginnings of trust that ran deeper than contracts and debts. Yeah, he said. I think maybe I did.
The plan started falling apart 2 weeks later, on a night when the summer storms rolled in like artillery fire. Evelyn had spent the day in town with Tucker, quietly meeting with 3 of Crow's major suppliers and showing them carefully selected portions of the stolen documents. The grain dealer had gone pale when he saw his name listed alongside bribe amounts. The equipment supplier had stammered excuses about economic pressure and family obligations. The cattle broker had simply stared at the numbers and said he'd need time to think. By the time they rode back to Black Ridge, Evelyn's head was pounding and exhaustion sat heavy in her bones. They'd planted seeds of doubt in 3 different operations, but whether those seeds would grow or get reported straight back to Crow remained to be seen. The storm caught them an hour from home. Lightning split the sky in jagged white cracks, and thunder rolled across the valley like cannon fire. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes, and rain came down so hard it stung exposed skin. They pushed the horses faster, both knowing that being caught in the open during a Montana thunderstorm was a good way to end up struck by lightning or washed away in a flash flood. The trail turned to mud under the downpour, and twice Tucker's horse nearly lost its footing on the slick rocks. When they finally rode through Black Ridge's gates, something felt wrong immediately. Too many lights were burning in the main house. Men were running between buildings despite the storm. And smoke. Not the clean wood smoke from chimneys, but the thick black smoke of something burning that shouldn't be. "The barn!" Tucker shouted over the thunder, already spurring his horse forward. Evelyn followed, her heart hammering. The eastern barn was engulfed in flames, fire roaring up into the night despite the rain. Men formed bucket lines from the creek, throwing water that seemed to do nothing against the inferno. Horses screamed from the paddock nearby, terrified by the smoke and heat. She slid from her saddle and ran toward the chaos. Through the smoke and rain, she spotted Caleb directing men, his voice cutting through the storm as he organized the firefighting effort. "The animals!" someone yelled. "There's still animals inside!" Evelyn saw Daniel near the barn entrance, trying to get close enough to open the doors but driven back by the heat. Without thinking, she grabbed a bucket, dumped water over her head and shoulders, and ran for the door. "What the hell are you doing?" Daniel grabbed her arm, but she shook him off. "Opening the door. Get ready to move them out." She didn't wait for permission. The heat was intense, even through her soaked clothes, and smoke burned her lungs with every breath. She reached the barn door and threw the bolt, pulling hard on the heavy wood. It swung open and a wall of smoke poured out, followed immediately by a panicked horse that nearly trampled her in its rush to escape. More animals followed, horses, a few milk cows, chickens scattering in every direction. Evelyn counted them through streaming eyes, trying to remember how many were supposed to be in this barn. The smoke was too thick to see clearly, but she thought she heard something deeper inside, a higher-pitched sound that didn't belong to livestock. She grabbed another bucket from a stunned ranch hand, dumped it over herself again, and plunged into the burning barn before anyone could stop her. The smoke was suffocating. Flames crawled up the walls and across the ceiling, consuming dry wood that had probably stood for a decade. Heat pressed down from above, and Evelyn dropped to her hands and knees, where the air was slightly clearer. She crawled forward, calling out, listening. There it was again. A crying sound, definitely human, definitely young. She found the source in one of the tack rooms. 2 children, couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, huddled together under a workbench. Their faces were black with soot, and tears streaked through the grime. The boy was clutching the girl, probably his sister, both of them coughing and terrified. "Come on," Evelyn gasped, reaching for them. "We have to move now." The boy shook his head, paralyzed with fear. Above them, something in the barn's structure groaned ominously. Evelyn didn't have time to argue or coax. She grabbed both children and pulled them out from under the bench, then pushed them ahead of her toward where she thought the door was. The smoke disoriented her, and for a terrifying moment she couldn't tell which direction led to safety and which led deeper into the inferno. Then she saw light. Not firelight, but the gray light of the storm outside. She shoved the children toward it, following on their heels. The boy stumbled, and Evelyn caught him, half carrying, half dragging him toward the exit. They burst out of this barn just as a section of the roof collapsed behind them with a crash that sent sparks spiraling into the rainy sky. Evelyn fell to her knees in the mud, coughing so hard she thought her lungs might turn inside out. The children collapsed beside her, gasping and crying. Hands pulled her away from the barn, voices shouting her name. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders while others swept up the children. Through watering eyes, Evelyn saw Caleb's face, his expression fierce and furious and relieved all at once. "What the hell were you thinking?" he demanded, his voice rough. "There were children," she managed between coughs. "You could have died." "They would have died." He opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to realize there was no point. Instead, he pulled her closer to the house, away from the burning barn that was now beyond saving. The bucket lines had given up trying to extinguish it and were focused on keeping the fire from spreading to other buildings. Martha appeared with hot tea that tasted like smoke no matter how much Evelyn drank. The children, she learned they belonged to one of the ranch hands and had been playing in the barn when the fire started, were being checked over by Mary, who had some medical knowledge from her time as a field nurse during the war. "Everyone accounted for?" Caleb asked Daniel, who was doing a head count. "Yeah, boss. Lost the barn and everything in it, but no casualties." "How'd it start?" Daniel's face went grim. "Wasn't an accident. Found these outside." He held up several broken bottles that smelled of kerosene. "Someone set this deliberately." The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of shock and anger spreading through the gathered men. Evelyn felt ice spread through her chest despite the blanket and tea. This wasn't random vandalism. This was retaliation. "Connolly," Tucker said, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Or Crow's men," Caleb said. "Doesn't matter which. Message is clear. They know we're fighting back and they're not playing nice anymore." "We should ride out now," one of the younger hands said, his voice hot with anger. "Hit them back before they do worse." "No!" Caleb's voice cut through the rising fury. "That's exactly what they want. We go charging off in the dark, half blind with rage. We'll ride straight into an ambush. We stay here. We defend what's ours, and we don't give them the satisfaction of seeing us panic." "But boss," I said no. "We've lost a barn, not the war. Tomorrow we'll reassess and plan our next move. Tonight we make sure nothing else burns." He organized watch rotations, placing armed men at intervals around the ranch buildings. The fire burned itself out as the storm intensified, leaving only a blackened skeleton of timber standing in the rain. Eventually, the exhausted ranch hands drifted off to their bunks, though Evelyn doubted many would sleep. She was sitting on the porch steps, still wrapped in the blanket and unable to stop coughing, when Caleb sat down beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, just watched the rain fall and the last embers of the barn glow in the darkness. "Those kids," Caleb said finally. "Ben and Sarah Turner. Their father works the north fence line. Good man, hard worker. If you hadn't gone in, someone else would have," Evelyn said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Everyone had been focused on the animals, and the fire spread. Those children would have died. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Haven't figured out which yet." "Can it be both?" He made a sound that might have been a laugh if he wasn't so angry. "You've been here 2 months. This isn't your fight. You don't owe these people anything. Neither do you, technically. You could sell to Crow tomorrow and walk away, but you won't. That's different." "How?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "This is my home. I built it from nothing. Every fence post, every acre, every head of cattle represents years of work. Giving up means those years meant nothing." "And what do you think my years meant?" Evelyn asked, turning to look at him. "The years I spent learning to read and write and manage accounts? The years helping my father run his ranch before the gambling destroyed everything? Those years died the day I stood on that auction block. But here, sorting your records, finding the theft, helping plan against Crow, for the first time since my father died, I feel like maybe those years were preparing me for something instead of just wasting away." The rain fell harder, drumming on the porch roof. Lightning flashed, illuminating Caleb's face for a moment. The hard lines, the scars, the exhaustion, but also something softer she hadn't seen before. "I bought your contract thinking I needed a bookkeeper," he said. "Turns out I got a lot more than that." "Careful, Boone. That almost sounded like a compliment. Don't let it go to your head." But there was warmth in his voice now, a gentleness that contrasted with his usual gruffness. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be rough." But tomorrow came faster than either of them expected, and rougher than they could have imagined. Evelyn woke to shouting. She stumbled from her bed, still in the smoke-stained clothes she'd fallen asleep in, and looked out her window to see chaos unfolding in the pre-dawn gray. The paddock gates were open and horses were scattered across the ranch. Fences had been cut in the north pasture, and spray-painted across the side of the main house in letters 3 feet high was a message that made her blood run cold. Sell or burn. Burn. She dressed quickly and ran downstairs to find Caleb already organizing damage control. Men were rounding up horses while others assessed the fence damage. The mood was ugly, anger and fear mixing into something volatile.
"How many horses did we lose?" Caleb asked Daniel. "Hard to say until we get them all back, but looks like maybe a dozen scattered into the hills. Could take days to find them all." "The cattle?" "Someone drove off about 100 head from the north pasture before cutting the fence. Trailheads toward Crow territory."
Evelyn felt sick. In one night they'd lost a barn, scattered horses, stolen cattle, and had their home literally defaced with threats. And underneath it all was the clear message that Crow knew about their counterattack and wasn't going to tolerate it. "We need to respond," Tucker said, his hand resting on his pistol. "This can't stand." "I know," Caleb said grimly, "but we need to be smart about it. Evelyn, what did those suppliers say yesterday? Any hint they were going to warn Crow?" She thought back, trying to remember details through the fog of smoke inhalation and exhaustion. The grain dealer seemed genuinely shaken. The equipment supplier was defensive, but the cattle broker, he didn't seem surprised, just said he'd think about it. "He told Crow," Daniel said flatly. "Probably rode straight there after you left," which meant Crow had known within hours that they'd stolen his documents and were using them to turn his own suppliers against him. He'd responded with overwhelming force, hitting Black Ridge hard enough to send a message: back off or face destruction. "What about the other ranchers?" Martha asked from the doorway, a rifle held casually in her arms like she'd been up all night standing guard. "You were going to show them the evidence, turn them against Crow." "That's still the plan," Caleb said, "but we're running out of time. The longer we wait, the more damage he can do." "Then stop waiting," Evelyn said. Everyone turned to look at her. "Call a meeting, today. Every rancher within 50 miles. Show them the documents, show them what Crow's doing to all of you, and make them choose sides." "That's a huge risk," Tucker said. "What if they side with Crow? What if they see you as the troublemaker?" "Then we lose," Evelyn said simply. "But we're losing anyway. At least this way we control the battlefield." Caleb studied her, that calculating expression she'd come to recognize. "You think you can make the case? Stand in front of men who've been ranching this territory for 20 years and convince them to go against the most powerful cattle baron in Montana?" "No," Evelyn said honestly. "But you can. You're one of them, Caleb. You survived the war, survived building this place, survived everything this land threw at you. They respect that. Show them the evidence, tell them the truth, and let them make the choice." "And what if the choice is violence? Range war? Then at least we're not fighting alone." The meeting was set for noon at the Territorial Grange Hall in Cedar Falls, a small settlement halfway between Black Ridge and the nearest cluster of ranches. Word was sent out by riders that morning, and by the time Evelyn and Caleb arrived with Tucker and Daniel as backup, over 30 ranchers and businessmen had gathered. The hall was a simple wooden building that usually hosted barn dances and community meetings. Today, it was packed with hard-faced men who'd spent their lives wresting survival from unforgiving land. They watched Caleb enter with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Silas Crow wasn't there, but 3 of his known associates were, standing in the back with arms crossed and eyes cold. Evelyn felt their attention like a physical weight. Caleb walked to the front of the hall and stood behind a rough podium. He didn't look nervous, just tired and determined. Evelyn stayed near the door with Tucker, ready to present documents if needed. "Most of you know me," Caleb started, his voice carrying through the room. "Some of you fought beside me during the war. Some of you helped me get Black Ridge started when all I had was hope and stubbornness. And some of you probably think I'm crazy for calling this meeting." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. "For the past 2 years, my ranch has been bleeding money. Cattle disappearing, supplies costing twice what they should, equipment breaking down faster than it should. I thought it was bad luck, bad management, the price of doing business in hard country. Turns out I was wrong. He nodded to Evelyn, who brought forward the documents they'd taken from Crow's safe. She spread them on a table where everyone could see, her hands surprisingly steady. What you're looking at is proof that Silas Crow has been systematically sabotaging ranches across this territory, bribing suppliers to inflate prices, paying officials to look the other way while his men steal cattle, buying up water rights to strangle operations until they fail and he can buy them cheap. The room erupted into noise, men shouting questions, demanding to see the documents, others yelling that this was lies and slander. Crow's associates pushed forward, faces red with anger. "That's stolen property," one of them shouted. "Boone broke into Mr. Crow's private office and took those papers illegally." "I don't care how we got them," Caleb shot back. "Look at what they say. Half of you are on these lists. The grain dealer in Settlers Bend, charging you 30% over market rate and paying Crow kickbacks. The lumber supplier? Same thing. Your water rights disappearing to mysterious buyers? Those buyers work for Crow." An older rancher named Henderson stood up, his face grave. "This is a serious accusation, Caleb. You got proof this isn't just coincidence?" Evelyn stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "Every transaction is documented. Dates, amounts, names. Cross-reference them with your own records, and you'll see the pattern. Mr. Crow has been manipulating the market for at least 3 years, maybe longer." "And you are?" Henderson asked. "Someone who knows how to read financial records well enough to see when they've been rigged." She met his eyes without flinching. "I don't care if you trust me. Trust the numbers." For the next hour, men crowded around the table examining documents. Arguments broke out as ranchers compared experiences and realized they'd all been hit with similar problems around the same time. Crow's associates tried to shout down the discussion, but were drowned out by increasingly angry voices. "My operation nearly went under last winter," one rancher said, his voice shaking with fury. "I thought I'd managed it wrong, pushed myself too hard. You're saying Crow was sabotaging me the whole time?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Caleb replied. "And he's been doing it to all of us, keeping us weak and desperate so he can pick us off one by one." "So what do we do about it?" Tucker asked from his position by the door. "We've got proof, but the territorial marshal's probably in Crow's pocket. Going through legal channels won't work." "Then we handle it ourselves," someone said, and several men nodded agreement. "Wait," Henderson held up his hands. "We start a range war. People die. Innocent people, women and children. There's got to be a better way." "There is," Evelyn said, an idea crystallizing as she spoke. "We hit Crow where it actually hurts, his reputation. These documents don't just prove local corruption. They show he's been violating territorial business laws. Maybe federal ones, too. We take this evidence to the newspapers in Helena. Make it public. Once everyone knows what he's been doing, his whole empire collapses because nobody will do business with him anymore." "Newspapers," Crow's associate sneered. "You think some ink on paper is going to stop Mr. Crow?" "No," Evelyn said coldly. "But the federal marshals might take an interest when they see evidence of interstate fraud and bribery of government officials. And territorial politicians might care when voters learn they've been protecting a criminal who's been robbing honest ranchers for years." The room went quiet as people absorbed this. It was elegant in its simplicity. No violence, no range war, just exposure. Turn Crow's own tactics against him by making his corruption too public to ignore. "I'll go," Henderson said finally. "I got family in Helena, connections to the newspaper. If these documents are real, they'll run the story." "I'll go with you," another rancher added. "More of us means it's harder to dismiss as one man's grudge." Within minutes, a plan had formed. 6 ranchers would ride to Helena with copies of the documents. The rest would return home, but stay ready to testify if federal marshals got involved. And everyone agreed. No violence unless Crow struck first. As the meeting broke up, Crow's associates pushed their way to the front. The leader, a thick-necked man named Wilson, got in Caleb's face. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Boone. Mr. Crow's going to destroy you for this." "He's been trying to destroy me for 2 years, Caleb said calmly. "How's that working out?" "You'll see. And your little bookkeeper, too. Pretty thing like that. Shame if something happened to her." The threat hung in the air like poison. Before Caleb could move, Evelyn stepped between them, looking Wilson dead in the eye. Touch me and you'll lose the hand, she said quietly. I survived being sold like livestock. I survived walking into your boss's house and stealing evidence right out from under him. You think I'm scared of a thug making threats in a public hall? Wilson's face darkened, but he stepped back. Without another word, he and the other associates left, slamming the door behind them. That was stupid, Caleb said once they were gone. Provoking them like that. They were going to come after us anyway. At least now they know it won't be easy. The ride back to Black Ridge was tense, everyone watching the ridgelines for signs of ambush. But they made it home without incident, and that night passed quietly for the first time in days. Men stood watch anyway, rifles loaded and ready. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the meeting in her mind, wondering if they'd done enough, if exposure would really stop Crow or just enrage him further. Around midnight, she gave up and went downstairs, finding Caleb in his office bent over maps of the territory. Can't sleep either? She asked from the doorway. He looked up, and in the lamplight his face looked older, carved by stress and exhaustion. Trying to figure out how Crow will come at us next. He's not going to sit still while we destroy his reputation. No, Evelyn agreed, sitting in the chair across from him. He'll hit back hard. The question is where and when, and if we can survive it long enough for the Helena newspapers to run the story. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. I keep thinking about those kids in the barn. If you hadn't been there, but I was there. This time. Next time you might not be. Or Martha, or Daniel, or any of the people I'm supposed to protect by running this ranch. He looked at her directly. Maybe I should just sell to Crow. End this before more people get hurt. Is that what you really think? I don't know what I think anymore. When I started Black Ridge, it was just me against the land. Simple. Now there's 30 people depending on this place surviving, and I've dragged all of them into a war with the most dangerous man in the territory. Evelyn stood and moved around the desk, surprising herself as much as Caleb. She took his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. Crow didn't start this war. He's been waging it for years against everyone. You're just the first one who fought back. And those 30 people depending on Black Ridge, they're not here because you forced them. They're here because you gave them something worth fighting for. Don't you dare give up now. For a moment they stayed like that, faces inches apart, and Evelyn became acutely aware that she was touching him, that this was far more intimate than anything that had passed between them before. She should pull back, restore the professional distance they'd maintained for weeks. Instead, Caleb reached up and covered her hands with his own. I bought you because I needed help saving this ranch, he said quietly. But somewhere along the way, that stopped being why I'm glad you're here. Caleb! Thunder crashed outside so loud it shook the windows. Then someone started hammering on the front door, shouting for the boss. They broke apart as Daniel burst into the office, his face pale with fear. Boss, we got fires. Multiple fires. The hay storage, the equipment shed, the south bunkhouse. And there's riders coming in from the north. At least 20 men, all armed. Crow had made his move, and Black Ridge was about to burn. Caleb moved before Evelyn could process Daniel's words, grabbing rifles from the cabinet and tossing one to her. She caught it on instinct, the weight familiar from years of her father teaching her to shoot, though she'd never aimed at anything human before. Get everyone to the main house, Caleb barked at Daniel. Women and children first. Anyone who can shoot gets a rifle. Everyone else gets to the cellar. Daniel ran, shouting orders. Within seconds, the ranch erupted into controlled chaos. Men poured from the bunkhouses, some still pulling on boots, others already armed and moving toward defensive positions. Martha appeared from the kitchen with a shotgun that looked older than she was, her face set in grim determination. Through the windows, Evelyn could see flames licking up from 3 different buildings. The hay storage was completely engulfed, sending up towers of sparks that swirled in the storm wind. In the distance, torches bobbed and weaved as riders approached from the north pasture. How many men do we have? Caleb asked Tucker, who'd materialized beside them. 22 on the ranch tonight. 5 more were supposed to come back from town tomorrow, but fat lot of good that does us now. 22 against 20. Better odds than I expected. Caleb checked his rifle with practiced efficiency. Position men at every window facing north. If they get close enough for a clean shot, take it. Otherwise, hold fire until I give the order. What about the fires? Martha asked. Let them burn. We save the people first, buildings second. It was the right call, but it still hurt. Evelyn watched the hay storage collapse in on itself with a roar, months of winter feed going up in smoke. The equipment shed was next. She could hear tools exploding in the heat, metal warping and cracking. The south bunkhouse was smaller, and men were already fighting to contain it with bucket lines, but the other two were lost. The riders came closer, spreading out as they approached. In the firelight, Evelyn could see their faces. Hard men, hired guns, the kind who do anything for the right price. At the front rode a figure she recognized even at a distance. Wilson, Crow's man from the meeting. They stopped about 100 yards out, just beyond easy rifle range. Wilson cupped his hands and shouted over the storm and flames. "Caleb Boone, you got one chance to make this easy. Come out, sign over the ranch to Mr. Crow, and we leave peaceful. Otherwise, we burn everything and everyone inside." "Go to hell," Caleb shouted back. "That's what I figured you'd say." Wilson's laugh carried across the distance. "Mr. Crow said to tell you this is nothing personal, just business. You understand business, right?" "I understand murder and arson. That's what you're committing right now. Prove it. Who's going to testify? Your men who'll be dead? The territorial marshal who's having dinner with Mr. Crow right now." Wilson gestured to the burning buildings. "This is just an unfortunate accident. Lightning strike during a storm. Tragic, really." Evelyn felt cold fury wash through her. The marshal was compromised, which meant even if they survived tonight, they had no legal recourse. Crow had planned this perfectly. Destroy Black Ridge and everyone who knew about his corruption in one brutal strike, then claim it was an act of nature. "You got 5 minutes to decide," Wilson called. "Then we come in shooting." He and his men retreated slightly, settling into wait. Some dismounted to rest their horses. Others checked weapons and ammunition. All of them looked patient, experienced. This wasn't their first raid. Caleb turned from the window, his face hard as stone. "We're not surrendering." "Didn't think we would," Tucker said. "But boss, they got us outnumbered, and they can just sit out there picking us off. We can't defend forever."
"We don't have to defend forever, just until dawn." Caleb looked at Evelyn. How long would it take to ride to Cedar Falls and get help? She calculated quickly. 2 hours there, 2 back if the riders know the trail. So 4 hours minimum.
"We need to hold for 4 hours." He turned to Daniel. "Take Carlos and ride for Henderson's ranch. It's closer than Cedar Falls. Tell him what's happening and get anyone who'll come. Move fast and stay off the main trail. Crow probably has men watching it." Daniel nodded and disappeared. Minutes later, Evelyn saw 2 riders slip out the back of the property, moving low and fast toward the eastern ridge. Torches shifted among Crow's men, but nobody seemed to notice the escape. "Now what?" Martha asked, checking her shotgun's ammunition. "Now we make them work for it," Caleb said. The attack came exactly 5 minutes later. Wilson gave a signal and half his men charged the main house while the others provided covering fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness, and bullets slammed into the log walls, sending splinters flying. "Return fire," Caleb shouted. The windows erupted with gunfire from Black Ridge's defenders. Evelyn aimed at a rider coming straight at the porch, leading him like her father had taught her with moving targets. She squeezed the trigger and the rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The rider jerked and fell from his horse, which veered away riderless into the darkness. She'd just shot a man, possibly killed him. Her hands wanted to shake, but she forced them steady, already working the bolt to chamber another round. There'd be time for horror later if she survived. Right now, survival meant shooting back. The first assault broke against the house's defenses. 3 of Crow's men lay motionless in the mud, and 2 more were wounded, being dragged back by their companions. But Black Ridge had casualties too. 1 man was down with a bullet through the shoulder, screaming while Mary tried to stop the bleeding in the main hallway. "They're testing our defenses," Tucker said, reloading. "Next time they'll hit harder." He was right. The second assault came from 2 directions simultaneously, riders hitting the front while men on foot approached from the eastern side, using the cover of the burning equipment shed. It was coordinated and professional, and Evelyn realized with sinking dread that these weren't just hired thugs. These were men who'd fought in the war, who knew tactics and strategy. A window shattered and something came flying through, a bottle with a burning rag stuffed in the neck. It hit the floor and exploded into flames, kerosene spreading across the wooden boards. "Fire!" someone yelled. Men abandoned their positions to stamp out the flames while others tried to cover the windows. Another bottle came through a different window, then a third. Suddenly they were fighting fires inside the house while also trying to hold off attackers outside. Evelyn grabbed a rug and beat at flames, consuming a curtain, smoke burning her already damaged lungs. Beside her, Martha was doing the same, both of them coughing and gasping but refusing to stop. If the main house went up, everyone inside would die. Caleb appeared through the smoke, his face blackened but his eyes clear. "Cellar, now! Everyone who's not shooting gets below." "I can shoot," Evelyn protested, "and you can also survive. Get down there with the others and bar the door. If we fall, you wait until it's quiet, then run for the creek. Follow it south to the Williams Ranch. Understand? I'm not leaving you to set. That's an order." His voice was steel. "Someone has to survive to testify about what happened here. That someone is you." He grabbed her arm and pushed her toward the cellar door, where other women and children were already descending. Martha went too, though she argued every step. The last thing Evelyn saw before the door closed was Caleb returning to the windows, rifle raised, firing into the chaos outside. The cellar was dark and cold and smelled of earth and stored vegetables. Someone had brought down a lamp, and in its flickering light Evelyn counted 12 people, mostly women and children, plus old Tom the blacksmith who'd lost his arm and couldn't shoot. Everyone looked terrified. "We're going to die," one woman whispered, clutching a baby. "No," Evelyn said with more confidence than she felt. "We're going to survive, and tomorrow we're going to make sure everyone knows what Silas Crow did here." Above them, the battle raged, gunfire, shouting, the crash of breaking glass and splintering wood. Smoke drifted through the floorboards, making everyone cough. The children cried softly, and their mothers held them, whispering reassurances that might have been prayers. Time became elastic in the darkness. Minutes felt like hours. Evelyn found herself counting the gunshots, trying to determine if there were more or fewer than before, if that meant Black Ridge was winning or losing. Her mind kept showing her images of Caleb falling, of Tucker and Daniel and all the men who'd become something like friends in the past months lying dead in the mud. Then suddenly the gunfire stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the chaos. Everyone in the cellar froze, barely breathing, listening to footsteps above, and voices shouting but unable to make out words. Evelyn gripped a heavy wrench Tom had brought down, the only weapon they had. If Crow's men came through that door, she'd at least make them work for it. The cellar door rattled. Someone was trying the latch. "It's barred," a rough voice said from above. "Probably women and children down there. Wilson wants everyone dead. No witnesses. So break it down." Footsteps retreated, then returned with something heavy that slammed against the door. The wood shuddered, but held. Another blow. Another. On the third hit, the bar cracked. Evelyn positioned herself directly below the door, wrench raised. If they were going to die, she'd take at least one of them with her. The fourth blow shattered the bar. The door flew open and a man started down the stairs, gun raised, and pitched forward with a scream, tumbling down the steps to land in a heap at the bottom. Another man appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by firelight, and then he too fell with a bullet hole in his chest. "Anyone down there?" Caleb's voice called from above. Evelyn nearly collapsed with relief. "We're here! We're all here!" "Stay put for now. It's not over yet." The door closed again, and they were back in darkness listening to the fight continue. But it sounded different now, fewer shots, more organized. Maybe they were actually holding. Another eternity passed. Then the door opened again, gentler this time, and Caleb appeared with Tucker behind him. "All clear," Caleb said. "They're retreating." Everyone scrambled up the stairs, desperate to escape the suffocating cellar. The main house was a disaster. Windows broken, furniture overturned, scorch marks across the walls and floor, blood spattered in dark pools. But it was still standing. Outside, dawn was breaking gray and cold through the rain. The fires had burned themselves out, leaving smoking ruins where buildings had stood. Bodies lay scattered across the yard. Too many bodies. Evelyn counted at least 8 of Crow's men dead or dying, but she also saw 4 of Black Ridge's defenders laid out by the porch, blankets covering their faces. "Wilson?" she asked. "Got away with most of his men," Tucker said bitterly. "We bloodied them good, but not good enough. They'll be back." "No, they won't." Daniel appeared from the direction of the North Road, riding hard with at least 30 men behind him. Henderson led the group, along with ranchers from the meeting and their hired hands. "Reinforcements are here." Relief washed through the gathered Black Ridge people, some actually crying. They'd survived the night, barely, but they'd survived. Henderson dismounted and took in the destruction with grim eyes. We heard the gunfire 5 miles out. Pushed hard to get here, but looks like you handled most of it yourselves. We held them off, Caleb said, but they'll regroup and come back stronger. Crow knows we're a threat now, and he won't stop until we're dead or broken. Then we don't give him the chance. Henderson pulled out a folded paper. Got a telegram this morning. The Helena newspapers are running your story. Front page. Federal marshals are already en route to investigate Crow's operation. The words took a moment to sink in. Then Evelyn felt something like hope flare in her chest for the first time since the attack began. How long until the marshals arrive, she asked. 3 days? Maybe 4? We just have to keep Crow contained until then. Contained how? Tucker asked. He's got more men and more money than all of us combined. But we've got numbers now, another rancher said. And we've got right on our side. That counts for something. It counts for nothing if we're dead, Martha said bluntly. Crow's going to see that newspaper story and know he's got a small window to silence everyone who can testify. He'll throw everything he has at us. She was right. Evelyn could see the calculation on everyone's faces. They'd scored a victory by surviving the night and getting the story published. But now Crow was cornered and desperate. A desperate man with an army of hired guns was possibly more dangerous than a confident one. We take the fight to him, Evelyn said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. We're thinking like prey, waiting for him to attack. But he's vulnerable now. His corruption is public. His allies are abandoning him. If we hit him first, hit him hard before he can regroup, we might actually win this. Hit him how? Caleb asked. The Territorial Council meets in Cedar Falls in 2 days. It's supposed to be routine business, water rights, grazing fees, county boundaries. But every rancher, every businessman, every official within 100 miles will be there. We show up with the evidence, with testimony from everyone he's hurt, and we force them to act. The council's chairman is in Crow's pocket, Henderson said. Maybe, but the other 8 members aren't. And if we present the evidence publicly, if we make it so obvious that ignoring it would be criminal, they'll have to move against him. It was desperate and risky and relied on the hope that territorial officials would actually do their jobs when faced with overwhelming proof of corruption. But it was also the only plan that didn't involve more people dying in open warfare. I'll go, Caleb said. Present the evidence myself. Not alone you won't, Henderson said. I'm coming, so are at least 10 other ranchers I can think of. We make this a show of force, peaceful but undeniable. I'm going too, Evelyn said. Caleb started to protest, but she cut him off. I organized the evidence. I know every detail of Crow's operation. You need me there to answer questions and counter any lies he tries to spin. He looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find a reason that would stick. Fine. But Tucker and Daniel come as guards, and we travel in a group, safety in numbers. The next 2 days were spent preparing. While men worked to make the ranch defensible in case of another attack, Evelyn organized the evidence into a presentation that even the most corrupt official couldn't ignore. She copied documents, prepared testimony, rehearsed answers to every objection she could imagine. Martha watched her work late into the night, occasionally bringing food that Evelyn barely touched. You know this might not work, Martha said on the eve of the council meeting. Crow might have too much power to overcome, even with evidence. I know, Evelyn said, not looking up from the papers she was organizing. But we have to try. What's the alternative? Let him burn us all out? Run away and start over somewhere else? Some people would choose that. I'm not some people. Evelyn set down her pen and looked at Martha directly. For years I watched my father destroy everything we had. I stood by and did nothing because I didn't think I could change it. Then I got sold like property, and I swore I'd never be helpless again. This, fighting Crow, saving Black Ridge, it's not just about the ranch. It's about proving that people like us can stand up to people like him and win. Martha smiled slightly. You love him, don't you, Caleb? The statement caught Evelyn completely off guard. We haven't what? Admitted it? Doesn't make it less true. I see how you look at him when you think nobody's watching, and I see how he looks at you, like you're the reason he's still fighting instead of giving up. Evelyn felt heat creep up her neck. Even if that were true, which I'm not saying it is, now's hardly the time to think about it. Now's exactly the time, Martha said gently, because one of you might not come back from that council meeting. And wouldn't you rather he knew?
Before Evelyn could respond, footsteps approached and Caleb appeared in the doorway. "Ready for tomorrow?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Evelyn said, grateful for the interruption. He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Evelyn, if things go wrong tomorrow, if Crow makes a move and it looks like we're not going to make it, I need you to promise me you'll run. Get out, head to Helena, make sure the story doesn't die with us." "I'm not promising that." "Yes, you are. Because someone has to survive to see this through, and it should be you." "Why me specifically?" He stepped closer, and Evelyn could see the exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. "Because you're the strongest person I know. Because you walked into an impossible situation and somehow made it better. Because if anyone can make sure Crow faces justice, it's you." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither of them was quite ready to unpack. Martha coughed politely and excused herself, leaving them alone in the lamplight. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone," Evelyn said quietly. "We started this fight together. We'll finish it together." Stubborn woman. Stubborn man. Something that might have been a smile crossed Caleb's face. Then he did something that surprised them both. He reached out and pulled her into a hug. Not romantic, not tentative, just solid and warm and real. Evelyn wrapped her arms around him and let herself take comfort in the embrace, knowing it might be the last peaceful moment they had for a while. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Caleb said against her hair, "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I walked into that auction. I'm glad I didn't let Marcus Webb buy you. I'm glad—" "I know," Evelyn said. "Me too." They stood like that for a long moment, taking strength from each other. Then they separated and returned to preparing for the battle ahead, both knowing that by this time tomorrow everything would have changed one way or another. The ride to Cedar Falls the next morning felt like going to war. 20 men rode together, heavily armed, with Evelyn and Caleb at the center carrying saddlebags full of evidence. They passed other groups heading the same direction, ranchers who'd heard about the council meeting and were coming to watch, settlers who'd been hurt by Crow's schemes, even some miners from the camps who had grievances of their own. By the time they reached Cedar Falls, the small settlement was packed. The Grange Hall couldn't possibly hold everyone, so tables had been set up outside for overflow. The territorial council looked nervous, clearly unprepared for this kind of turnout. And standing near the front, surrounded by at least 20 armed men, was Silas Crow himself. He looked older than when Evelyn had seen him at his ranch, the confidence replaced by something harder and more dangerous. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and the hatred in them was palpable. She'd humiliated him, stolen from him, exposed him. He wasn't going to forgive that. The council chairman, a portly man named Morrison, banged a gavel and called for order. It took several minutes for the crowd to settle. "This is highly irregular," Morrison said, mopping sweat from his face. "The agenda for today's meeting did not include—" "The agenda just changed," Henderson interrupted, standing up. "We're here to present evidence of widespread corruption and criminal activity by one of your constituents, and you're going to hear it." Morrison looked at Crow, then at the crowd, clearly trying to decide which was more dangerous to cross. "Very well, present your evidence." Caleb stood and made his way to the front, Evelyn beside him carrying the documents. For the next hour, they laid out everything: the stolen financial records, testimony from ranchers who'd been squeezed by inflated prices, proof of bribery and manipulation. Evelyn presented each piece methodically, answering questions, connecting the dots in ways that even the most skeptical council member couldn't ignore. Crow sat stone-faced through most of it. But when Evelyn presented the payments to Ray Connolly, proving the former foreman had been working as Crow's inside man, she saw his jaw tighten. "These are lies," Crow finally said, standing. "Forged documents stolen through illegal means by desperate people trying to blame their failures on someone else." "Then explain the dates," Evelyn said calmly. "Explain why every forged transaction corresponds exactly to real events that a dozen witnesses can confirm. Explain why your handwriting appears on payment authorizations. Explain why Ray Connolly deposited exactly these amounts into his bank account on exactly these dates." "You have no proof I wrote anything." "Actually, we do." She pulled out another document. "This is a letter you sent to the Territorial Land Office 3 months ago requesting information about Black Ridge's water rights. Your signature is at the bottom. We had a handwriting expert compare it to the signatures on the payment authorizations. It's a match." The crowd erupted into shouts and arguments. Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order.
Crow's face had gone red, his hands clenched into fists. "You want to talk about illegal activity?" he shouted over the noise. "How about breaking and entering? How about theft?" Caleb Boone admitted his people stole these documents from my private office. "After you tried to burn down my ranch," Caleb shot back. "After you had your men attack us in the middle of the night. After you spent 2 years systematically destroying my operation and everyone else's who wouldn't bow down to you. Prove it. We have 4 dead men on my property and 8 more of your hired guns in the territorial jail," Tucker said, standing up from the crowd. "All of them willing to testify that you paid them to attack Black Ridge." It was a bluff. The wounded attackers had been questioned, but none had admitted working for Crow directly. But the crowd didn't know that, and neither did the council. Morrison looked genuinely distressed now, caught between obvious corruption and the political backlash of addressing it. "Mr. Crow, these are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence to counter them?" "I have the truth," Crow said. "And I have this." He gestured, and one of his men brought forward a bound figure, Ray Connolly, looking beaten and terrified. "My former employee who's willing to testify that Caleb Boone orchestrated this entire conspiracy to frame me after he fell behind on his loans." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Connolly was the weak link, the one person who could muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. If he testified against them, it became a he said, she said situation that the council could use as an excuse to do nothing. "Ray," Caleb said quietly, "don't do this. Tell them the truth." "The truth is you're a failure," Connolly spat, though his voice shook. "Always have been. Too proud to accept help, too stubborn to know when you're beaten. Mr. Crow offered me good money to make sure you got what you deserved, and I took it, because you deserved it." "You're a thief and a traitor," Tucker said. "I'm a survivor, something you're not going to be after today." The words carried an edge of threat that made several people in the crowd shift nervously. Evelyn realized Crow wasn't trying to win the council meeting anymore. He was stalling, keeping everyone gathered in one place while something else was happening. She looked at the armed men surrounding Crow and suddenly understood. This wasn't a defense. It was a trap. "Caleb," she said urgently, grabbing his arm. "We need to leave. Now." He saw it too, his eyes widening as he understood. But before they could move, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. People screamed and scattered, the orderly meeting dissolving into chaos. Evelyn hit the ground as bullets whined overhead, Caleb covering her body with his own. Through the panic, she saw Crow's men advancing, weapons drawn, cutting off the exits. This wasn't just an attack on Caleb and his allies. Crow was trying to eliminate everyone who could testify against him in one brutal massacre disguised as a public shooting. But he'd miscalculated. He'd forgotten that half the men in this crowd were armed ranchers and settlers who knew how to fight. Return fire came from a dozen directions, and suddenly it was Crow's men who were pinned down. "The evidence," Evelyn gasped. "We have to protect the evidence." She crawled toward the saddlebags they'd brought, bullets kicking up dirt around her. Caleb followed, shouting for Tucker and Henderson. They formed a protective circle around the documents while chaos raged around them. The territorial council members had scattered, though she saw Morrison crouched behind an overturned table looking terrified. Whatever authority they'd had was meaningless now. This had become a war, and wars weren't won with speeches and paperwork, but they could be ended with them. Evelyn grabbed the most damning document, the payment records showing Crow's bribes to territorial officials, and held it up high where everyone could see. "This is what he's trying to hide," she screamed over the gunfire. "This is why he's willing to murder all of you. Because these papers prove he's been bribing your officials, stealing your land, destroying your livelihoods." Some people actually stopped shooting to look. She saw recognition dawn on faces as they understood the stakes. This wasn't just about Black Ridge anymore. This was about whether men like Crow could commit crimes in broad daylight and face no consequences. "He thinks we're all too scared or too weak to stand against him," Evelyn continued, her voice raw. "He thinks we'll scatter like prey if he shows enough violence. But he's wrong. We're not prey. We're people who've survived everything this territory could throw at us. And we're not running anymore." Someone started clapping, then others joined in. The gunfire tapered off as Crow's men realized they were outnumbered not just by armed defenders, but by a crowd that had transformed from frightened civilians into something much more dangerous, people who'd decided to fight back. Crow must have seen it too, because he suddenly spun and ran for his horse, his remaining men covering his retreat. Within seconds, he was riding hard toward the north, leaving behind bodies and chaos and any pretense of innocence. The silence that followed was broken only by groaning from the wounded and crying from the terrified. Evelyn slowly stood, still clutching the evidence, and found herself facing a crowd of people who looked at her with something like awe. "Someone ride for the federal marshals," Henderson said into the quiet. "Tell them Silas Crow just attempted mass murder to cover up corruption. I don't think even his bribes will save him from that." 3 men mounted up and rode off at a gallop. The rest began organizing, tending to wounded, securing Crow's men who'd surrendered, collecting weapons. Through it all, Evelyn stood holding the documents that had nearly cost all of them their lives. Caleb appeared beside her, blood running from a cut on his temple, but otherwise intact. "You all right?" "I think so. You?" "Been better, been worse." He looked at the papers in her hands. "You know what you just did? Standing up like that, giving that speech? Something incredibly stupid? Something incredibly brave. You turned the tide. They were ready to run until you reminded them what they were fighting for." Evelyn felt shaky now that the adrenaline was fading, but also strangely calm. They'd survived. The evidence was intact, and Crow was running like a coward with federal marshals incoming and an entire territory turned against him. "So what happens now?" she asked. Caleb looked at the crowd, at the overturned tables and scattered council members, at the mountains rising in the distance beyond the settlement. "Now," he said, "we rebuild, and we make sure this never happens again." The federal marshals arrived in Cedar Falls 3 days after the shooting, riding in with an authority that should have brought relief, but instead felt hollow. Evelyn watched them survey the damage, the bullet-scarred buildings, the graves being dug for those who hadn't survived Crow's desperate attack, the witnesses who kept glancing over their shoulders like they expected another ambush. The lead marshal, a gray-haired man named Clayton, who moved like his joints hurt, set up office in what remained of the Grange Hall and began taking statements. Evelyn was among the first called, spending 6 hours walking him through every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence they'd gathered. Clayton listened without expression, occasionally making notes, his face revealing nothing about whether he believed her or thought this was all some elaborate frontier grudge match. "And you obtained these documents how exactly?" Clayton asked for the 3rd time, pointing at the stolen records from Crow's safe. "I already told you. We took them from his office." "That's theft, Miss Mercer. Makes everything here potentially inadmissible in a federal court." Evelyn felt frustration boil up but forced it down. He was systematically destroying ranches across the territory through bribery and fraud. We had no other way to prove it because he owned the local law enforcement. That's an allegation you can't prove. The territorial marshal was having dinner with Crow the night his men attacked Black Ridge. Multiple witnesses can confirm that. Clayton sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Look, I believe something illegal was happening here. But belief isn't evidence. And evidence obtained through illegal means is problematic at best. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand that you're looking for reasons not to act," Evelyn said, her voice sharp. "Because going after someone like Crow is complicated and messy and might anger powerful people. But 23 people are dead because we tried to do this the right way. How many more have to die before complicated becomes worthwhile?" The marshal's expression hardened. "I've been doing this job for 17 years, Miss Mercer. I've seen more death and corruption than you can imagine. Don't presume to tell me about my duties." "Then do them," Evelyn shot back. "Stop looking for excuses and do what you were sent here to do." They stared at each other across the scarred table, and for a moment Evelyn thought she'd push too hard and he'd throw her out. Then something shifted in Clayton's weathered face. "You're right," he said quietly. "I am looking for reasons to make this easier than it is, because I know what prosecuting Silas Crow means. Years of legal battles, threats against witnesses, bribes offered to juries. I've seen cases like this fall apart because people got scared or bought off or simply decided it wasn't worth the trouble." He tapped the documents. "But I've also never seen evidence this thorough. Someone put in real work here." "Several someones," Evelyn said. "Most of them risking everything they had. Then I guess I owe it to them to see this through." Clayton stood and extended his hand. "I'll need you to testify when this goes to trial. That going to be a problem?" Evelyn shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a life harder than paperwork in courtrooms. "I'll be there." Over the next week, Clayton and his team fanned out across the territory, taking statements and gathering corroborating evidence. The story that emerged was even worse than Evelyn had documented. Crow's corruption reached back nearly a decade, affecting hundreds of people. Small ranchers forced into bankruptcy, settlers cheated out of land claims. Even deaths that had been ruled accidents but now looked suspicious. Crow himself had vanished. Some said he'd fled to California. Others claimed he was hiding in the mining camps, protected by men still loyal to him. A few whispered that he'd never left the territory at all, that he was watching and waiting for his chance to strike back. Evelyn tried not to think about that last possibility as she returned to Black Ridge with Caleb, Tucker, and the others who'd survived the Cedar Falls shooting. The ranch looked different in daylight. Smaller somehow, more vulnerable. The burned buildings stood as blackened reminders of how close they'd come to losing everything. "Going to take months to rebuild," Daniel said, surveying the damage. "Maybe longer. Then we start today," Caleb said. "Tucker, organize crews for cleanup. Daniel, inventory what we lost and what we need. Martha, figure out food and housing with half our storage gone." Everyone moved to their tasks with the weary efficiency of people who'd survived disaster and knew that survival meant getting back to work. Evelyn helped where she could, though her skills lay more in ledgers than lumber. By evening, she found herself back in the records room, trying to reconstruct financial documents that had been lost in the fires. A knock on the doorframe made her look up. Henderson stood there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course. Come in." He settled into a chair with the care of someone whose body had been through too much recently. "Wanted to thank you for what you did in Cedar Falls, standing up like that when everyone else was ready to scatter." "I just said what needed saying." "No, you did more than that. You reminded people that some things are worth fighting for even when it's dangerous. That's not nothing." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "Some of us ranchers got together. We know Black Ridge took the hardest hits in this fight, and we figured we owed you." Evelyn opened the envelope to find a bank draft for $5,000, more money than she'd seen in her entire life. "We can't accept this," she said immediately. "Why not? You're in debt to the bank? Got buildings to rebuild? Lost cattle and equipment? This helps." "But you all lost things too. You all took risks. Not like Caleb did. Not like you did." Henderson stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Pride's a fine thing, Miss Mercer, but sometimes accepting help is the braver choice. Think about it." He left before she could argue further. Evelyn stared at the bank draft, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't charity. It was recognition. Respect. The kind of thing she'd never expected to receive from men who'd once watched her sold on an auction block. She found Caleb in the barn, checking on horses that had been spooked during the attack and were still skittish. He looked up when she entered, and she saw exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Henderson came by," she said, showing him the draft. Caleb's eyebrows rose. "That's generous." "He said some things are worth fighting for, that we reminded people of that." "Did we? Or did we just drag everyone into a war that's going to haunt this territory for years?" He sat heavily on a hay bale. 23 dead, Evelyn. 23 people who'd be alive if I'd just sold to Crow when he first asked. You don't believe that, don't I? I keep running the numbers, trying to figure out if there was another way. Something less bloody. Evelyn sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You know what my father used to say? That the hardest choices are the ones where both options hurt. You could have sold and watched Crow do to others what he'd been doing to you. Or you could fight and people would die fighting beside you. Both choices had blood on them. You picked the one where at least people had a chance. Some chance. We're broke, burned out, and living under the threat of retaliation while waiting for a trial that might not even happen. The trial will happen. Clayton's building the case. And if Crow finds a way to escape justice, if his lawyers twist everything and he walks free, then we'll have proven that people like us can stand up to people like him. That alone changes things." Evelyn reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his scarred ones. "I was property, Caleb, bought and sold like livestock. In most places in this territory, I still am. Women have almost no legal rights, no recourse when men decide to treat us as less than human. But what happened in Cedar Falls? When I stood up and people listened? That's change. Small, messy, incomplete change. But change nonetheless." He squeezed her hand. How'd you get so smart? Desperation, mostly, and being too stubborn to accept the world as it is. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling bone-tired but also strangely hopeful. We're going to be okay. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but we're going to rebuild this ranch into something better than it was. We, he repeated softly. I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell, listening to horses shift in their stalls and wind whistle through the gaps in the barn walls. Outside, the ranch slowly came back to life. Voices calling, hammers pounding, the ordinary sounds of people refusing to give up. The trial, when it finally happened 4 months later, felt both climactic and anticlimactic. Federal prosecutors brought charges of fraud, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and a dozen other crimes. The evidence Evelyn had compiled formed the backbone of the case, supplemented by testimony from dozens of witnesses. Silas Crowe sat through it all with the bearing of a man who still believed he was untouchable. His lawyers were expensive and skilled, poking holes where they could, casting doubt on the credibility of witnesses, arguing about the admissibility of stolen documents. At one point, it seemed like they might actually succeed in getting most of the evidence thrown out. Then Clayton produced something Evelyn hadn't known existed. Crowe's personal journal, seized when marshals finally tracked him down hiding in a mining camp near the Canadian border. In his own handwriting, Crowe had documented years of bribes, threats, and manipulations. He'd kept records of everything, probably as insurance against his co-conspirators turning on him. It destroyed his defense overnight. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman read guilty verdicts on 17 separate charges. Crowe's face remained impassive, but Evelyn saw his hands shake as he gripped the table. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in the territorial prison. His assets were seized to pay restitution to victims. His empire, built over decades, collapsed in a single afternoon. Evelyn felt no triumph as they led him away, just exhaustion and a distant sadness for how much damage one man's greed had caused. Beside her, Caleb exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for months. "It's over," he said. "This part is," Evelyn agreed. "Now comes the harder part." She was right. Winning the trial didn't magically fix everything. Black Ridge was still in debt, still missing buildings and cattle, still recovering from months of conflict. The bank that held their loans had been sold to new owners who were less patient about repayment schedules. Suppliers who'd been part of Crowe's network had gone bankrupt, leaving gaps in the market that took time to fill. But slowly, stubbornly, they rebuilt. The money from Henderson and the other ranchers helped clear the most pressing debts. Insurance settlements came through eventually, though nowhere near enough to cover actual losses. Evelyn renegotiated contracts with new suppliers, learning to drive harder bargains now that she understood how easily ranchers could be exploited. Caleb hired new men to replace those who'd died or drifted away, choosing carefully this time with references and trial periods. Martha expanded the ranch house to accommodate workers who'd lost homes in the fires. Tucker took over as foreman, proving far more competent than Connolly had ever been. Daniel taught younger hands the skills they needed, turning raw recruits into genuine cowboys. And Evelyn kept the books, tracking every dollar, making sure they never again fell into the kind of financial chaos that had nearly destroyed them. 6 months after the trial, she was working late in the records room when Caleb appeared with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey that looked older than both of them. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "We're in the black," he said, pouring drinks. "First time in 3 years. Thought that deserved celebrating." Evelyn checked her latest calculations. He was right. Income finally exceeded expenses with enough margin to start saving for emergencies. It wasn't prosperity, but it was stability. "To survival," she said, raising her glass. "To more than survival," Caleb countered. "To building something that lasts." They drank, and the whiskey burned smooth and warm. Evelyn set down her glass and looked at the man who'd bought her freedom and somehow became the center of her world. "I've been thinking," she said, "about my contract." Caleb went very still. "What about it?" "According to my calculations, the debt is paid. My father's gambling losses, the auction price, interest, it's all covered by the work I've done." "I suppose it is," he said carefully. "So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that technically I'm free to leave. Go anywhere, do anything. My contract obligations are fulfilled." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Caleb studied his glass like it held answers. "And?" he finally asked. And I don't want to leave, Evelyn said. But I also don't want to stay because of a contract or obligation. If I stay, I want it to be a choice. My choice. What kind of choice are we talking about? Evelyn felt her heart hammering. This was scarier than facing Crow's men, scarier than standing up in Cedar Falls, scarier than anything she'd done in her entire life. But she'd learned over the past year that the things worth having were usually the things that terrified you. I want to stay as your partner, not your employee, not someone you feel responsible for. Your equal partner in running this ranch and building whatever comes next. Caleb set down his glass very deliberately. That all you want? No, Evelyn admitted, but it's a start. He stood and moved around the desk, pulling her to her feet. His hands were gentle, but his eyes were intense with emotions he'd kept locked down for too long. I bought your contract thinking I was saving you, he said quietly. Took me about 2 weeks to realize you didn't need saving. What you needed was a chance. And what I needed was someone who'd see this place and these people as worth fighting for. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You changed everything, Evelyn. Not just the ranch, me. Made me remember why I built this place. Made me want to fight instead of just survive. Is this the part where you ask me to marry you? Evelyn asked, trying for lightness despite the tears threatening to spill. Do you want me to? I want you to mean it, not because you feel obligated or grateful or because it's the proper thing to do. I want you to ask because you actually want to spend your life with me, even though I'm difficult and stubborn and terrible at cooking. Caleb laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. Evelyn Mercer, you're the most difficult, stubborn, brilliant woman I've ever met. You argue with everything I say, you take risks that make my hair gray, and you absolutely cannot cook to save your life. Will you marry me anyway? Yes, she said, and kissed him before he could say anything else, before the moment could become too heavy with meaning. His arms came around her, and for a while nothing existed except the two of them, finally acknowledging what they'd been dancing around for months. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn saw Martha standing in the doorway trying unsuccessfully to hide a smile. About time, Martha said. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you two in a room together. How long have you been standing there? Caleb asked. Long enough to know I'm going to need to start planning a wedding. Lord knows neither of you has any sense for social occasions. She swept forward and hugged Evelyn fiercely. Welcome to the family, child, officially this time. The wedding happened on a clear October morning with the mountains painted in fall colors and the ranch looking almost whole again. They kept it simple because neither Caleb nor Evelyn wanted anything elaborate. A ceremony in the yard with everyone who'd fought beside them over the past year gathered as witnesses. Henderson officiated since he was a territorial magistrate, along with being a rancher. Tucker and Daniel stood up with Caleb, while Martha stood with Evelyn. The vows were traditional, except for one part Evelyn had insisted on adding, a promise to be partners in all things, to make decisions together, to share both burdens and triumphs equally. When Henderson pronounced them married, the entire ranch erupted in cheers. Someone produced instruments and music filled the yard. Tables laden with food appeared as if by magic. People danced and drank and celebrated not just a wedding, but survival, community, the stubborn refusal to let bastards like Crow destroy what they'd built. Late in the evening, Evelyn found herself on the porch watching the party continue, Caleb's arm warm around her shoulders. Think we'll make it? She asked. Long term? I think we'll try like hell, he said. That's about all anyone can promise. Good enough for me. She meant it. There were no guarantees in life, no perfect endings where everything worked out smoothly. But there were choices and chances and people willing to fight for something better. That was enough. The months turned into years, and Black Ridge grew beyond what Evelyn had imagined that first rainy night when she'd arrived exhausted and afraid. The ranch prospered through hard work and careful management, becoming known across the territory for fair dealing and quality cattle. But the changes went deeper than economics. Evelyn established a fund to help people escape abusive debt contracts, using her own experience to identify cases where workers were being exploited. She couldn't save everyone, and the legal battles were exhausting, but slowly the territory's laws began to shift. Other women noticed and started speaking up, demanding rights and protections they'd been denied for years. Caleb worked with neighboring ranchers to create cooperative agreements that protected them from the kind of market manipulation Crow had employed. They shared resources during hard times, helped each other through disasters, built something more resilient than any individual operation could be alone. The Territorial Council, embarrassed by how thoroughly they'd failed to address Crow's corruption, actually passed reform legislation. It wasn't perfect, and enforcement remained spotty, but it was progress. Clayton, the federal marshal, became a regular visitor to the territory, his presence making officials think twice about accepting bribes or turning blind eyes to abuse. 3 years after their wedding, Evelyn sat in the records room, expanded now and properly organized, reviewing accounts when she heard voices outside. Through the window, she saw a wagon pulling up with a family inside, their possessions piled in back, children's faces pressed against the sides, looking at the ranch with wide eyes. She went out to meet them, recognizing the exhausted hope in the parents' expressions. She'd worn that same look once. "Help you?" she asked. "We heard this was a place that gave people fair chances," the man said. "We got experience with horses. Both of us can work hard. Kids are young, but they're good kids. We're not looking for charity, just honest work." Evelyn studied them, seeing echoes of her own past in their weathered faces and determined eyes. "You run from debt?" The woman flinched but nodded. "My husband's father gambled. We got stuck with his obligations when he died. Tried to work it off, but they kept adding interest faster than we could pay. Finally just left in the night." "That takes courage," Evelyn said. "Running with children. Staying would have killed us," the man said simply. "This way, at least we got a chance." Evelyn made her decision. "We've got work if you want it. Pays fair, housing's provided, and what you earn is yours. No hidden fees or interest. We don't hold anyone against their will. You work here as long as it suits you. Leave when it doesn't. That acceptable?" The relief on their faces was painful to witness. "More than acceptable, ma'am." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Ranching's hard work and we expect everyone to pull their weight, but you'll be treated fairly and paid honestly. That's the deal." She helped them get settled, then returned to the porch where Caleb had been watching. "Another one?" he asked. "Another one," she confirmed. "Going to turn away people who need help?" "Didn't say that. Just noticing we're becoming known for it. Eventually, someone's going to object to us sheltering debt runners. Let them object. We're not doing anything illegal. And if enough ranches start operating this way, maybe the whole system changes." Caleb pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Stubborn woman." "Stubborn man. We going to have this argument every time?" "Probably. Makes life interesting." They stood together watching the sun set over the ranch they'd fought so hard to save and transform. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still a struggle. Old enemies occasionally stirred up trouble and new challenges emerged regularly. But it was theirs, built on choices rather than obligations, partnership rather than ownership. And that made all the difference. 5 years after the trial, Evelyn received a letter from Clayton. Silas Crow had died in prison, apparently of natural causes, though rumors suggested it was less natural than the official report claimed. His remaining associates had scattered, most leaving the territory entirely. The era of his corruption was truly over. She showed the letter to Caleb that evening. He read it silently, then folded it and handed it back. "Feel anything?" he asked. "Relieved mostly. Maybe a little sad. He could have built something legitimate with all that energy and intelligence. Some people only know how to take, never how to build." "Yeah." Evelyn tucked the letter away. "I'm glad we're not those people." "Me too." They went about their evening, the ordinary rhythm of ranch life continuing around them. Somewhere in that ordinariness was a kind of victory that mattered more than any trial verdict. The victory of surviving, rebuilding, refusing to let trauma define their story. Years later, travelers crossing Montana would still tell stories about Black Ridge Ranch. Not because it was the biggest or richest or most powerful, but because it represented something different. A place where a woman sold at auction had become an equal partner in one of the territory's most respected operations. A place where workers were treated as humans rather than property. A place that proved change was possible if you were willing to fight for it. And on quiet evenings, sitting on the porch watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light, Evelyn would sometimes think back to that rainy day when she'd stood on an auction block in chains, certain her life was over. She'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. Not because Caleb bought her freedom, but because somewhere in the struggle to save Black Ridge, she'd learned that freedom wasn't something someone else could give you. It was something you claimed for yourself, fought for, defended against anyone who tried to take it away. That lesson, hard-won and blood-bought, was what she passed on to others who came seeking chances and hope. Not promises of easy solutions or perfect endings, but the stubborn truth that people could change their circumstances if they refused to give up. Some days that was enough. Most days, actually. And on the very best days, sitting beside the man she'd chosen, and who'd chosen her back, watching the ranch they'd built together thrive despite everything the world had thrown at them, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that standing defiant on that auction block had been the beginning of something far greater than she'd ever imagined. Freedom, partnership, home. Not perfect, but real. And that was more than enough.